All right, there we go.
Yep.
Let's see if I can proceed to the next slide. All right, so we have a few objectives for our economic session. We're here to teach you, easement specialists, about the costs and benefits of soil health. And we want to do that, equip you with a lot of resources. We have 19 AFT and NRCS co-branded soil health experts. Thank you for muting yourself. We have lots of, and if others could mute themselves, we have lots of slide decks to use in addition to these 2-page success stories that you could use with your farmers and landowners, a 1 slide deck approach, a multiple slide deck approach, so additional resources to help you talk about case studies. We have gleaned the literature, surveyed it, and distilled its findings, and we have a PowerPoint presentation called Amassing Economic Evidence to share with you, and then we've put it all together in a new publication series called Farmers Guides for Soil Health that we're going to tell you about. And last but not least, we're going to be joined by a soil health successful grazer himself, Don Jackson. And so we're thrilled for that conversation. So we're going to put this all together for you and then encourage you to collaborate with your local conservation professionals, because you should not feel like you have to do this yourself. You can take all of this, all these resources we're sharing with you today and share it with them and ask them to serve as your technical service providers. And finally, as we always do, we would like to inspire you to help us find FRPP-related soil health successful farmers to feature in future local case studies to make your jobs even more more effective, to be able to feature somebody who has permanently protected their land and has accomplished being a soil health successful farmer. All right, so we are going to run through this agenda. I'm going to speak for 15 minutes about the objectives, provide an overview of the resources and options for use. The next 15 minutes, Chelly will talk about this amassing economic evidence for soil health and our first farmer's guide focused on grazing soil health practices. We'll pause for a Q&A break, and then Ben is going to talk to you about a row crop case study featuring a livestock farmer, and then conduct the interview with Don, who is going to be serving as our new grazing case study farmer. So let's just get on the same page about the economic importance of soil health. You have heard so many wonderful things from Bianca and team over the course of 2 days, right? And you know there is a lot of scientific evidence about soil health practices and the wonderful things they do are increasing water holding capacity, reducing water runoff, lowering climate emissions, and securing carbon. But the big ag community, and that's a big tent, producers, landowners, retailers, bankers, corporations with sustainability goals, you know, they're new kids on the block. They all want to know about the economic effects associated with soil health. And so we know that there is not enough information out there about the economic outcomes. And so we wanted to try to pull it all together and give it to you all in a digestible, usable format. Let's get on the same page. What is economics? I'm sure we can all come up with our own definition of it, but this is a pretty good one from the American Economic Association. It's the study of scarcity. It's the study of how people use resources and respond to incentives, or it's the study of decision making. And we think it's very important, right? Farmers often put up a lot of reasons why they are risk averse and don't want to try new things and don't want to try conservation practices. And they often say, I don't know what it's going to cost me, and I certainly don't know how much it's going to benefit me. And so we think economics is really important, but we also are humble. And we know that it's not the only thing going on. Farmers base their decisions on many things, in addition to the bottom line, such as they care about short-term and long-term outcomes. They have varying levels of riskiness for changing practices. Many of them very much care about local and state and regional and global environmental benefits. And many of them are guided by personal and community values as well. So here we are. I'm going to just do this quick overview of AFT resources on soil health economics. So here are a nice presentation of the states and the numbers of case studies that we have in each state that feature row crop or almond soil health successful producers. And what we wanted to point out for you is that USDA NRCS provides an external review with their suite of economists and soil health scientists. And so we know it helps us increase the credibility of these outreach and education materials by having that logo on them. So please peruse these case studies when you get a chance. There are several that are livestock related, even though they are row crop. And now today we're going to talk to you about our upcoming grazing oriented case study. Here are our farmers' guides to soil health. So we've already published 3 that focused on corn, soybeans, and small grains. And each of them is presented depending on the methodology of the analyses of soil health economics. So you'll find one that talks to you about budget analyses, and that's what we basically do in our case study. So we've surveyed the literature of whoever else has done case studies, so you don't just get to learn from us and ours, but you get to hear from everybody else's as well. And we've summarized that in a nice, easy to read, compelling, engaging 2-page fact sheet, a farmer guide. We've surveyed the literature from the national surveys, the ARMS survey, and the cover crop SARE survey. To be specific, what are they saying about the economic evidence for no-till and cover crops? And then finally, we asked, what are research trials saying about what happens to economic indicators, particularly yield and income effects, when farmers adopt soil health practices versus in comparison to a conventional management. And next up, we've got 3 guides in progress for the grazing side of the story that we hope will benefit both rangeland and pasture land-based systems. Just a few more slides now. So we want to just recognize that there are a variety of livestock-related soil health economic systems out there. So first of all, we have the grazing world, and what are the soil health practices involved in that? There's intensive grazing management opportunities, and we've identified and categorized them as simple rotation, adaptive multi-paddock or AMP grazing, and seasonal practices like mob or flash. And this is all in contrast to conventional approaches to grazing. Then, of course, there's management considerations, tweaking each and every one of those things when you're applying it to rangeland versus pasture land. And then finally, there are many operations that are beef producers, dairy producers, but they also grow hay and silage in their row crop production acres. And so we want to analyze that group of people as well. And you can find many of them already featured in our case studies, in particular, the New York case studies, where a lot of dairy production, as you know, is occurring. And here is just a highlight of our brand new grazing soil health economic case study. It's a partial budget analysis that is analyzing the farmer's successful switch from conventional to intensive management, and all of the different changes that they witnessed, including forage productivity, animal production changes, feed and veterinary cost changes, and infrastructure cost changes. So the current one is the beef cow-calf operation that Ben is going to share with you via interview with the producer. And the next one up is a dairy-focused one. So here is a slide that I think my last slide. And so what I want you to do before we dive into Chelly and Ben's conversations, where you're going to get some real awesome protein and potatoes information from them, is, as you start to figure out how to use all of these outreach and education materials, before you begin, reach out to your local conservation professionals so you can establish a great working relationship with them. And then introduce them to your landowner and your farmers to provide them with that technical and financial assistance that your landowner and farmer may really benefit from. And then share the economic case studies, these PowerPoints, and the farmers' guides with them as well, so that those conservation professionals know what you know, and you can help build their conservation toolkit, and you're providing them with resources to make their jobs even more effective. And then when you're getting ready to talk to your farmers, your FRPP-related farmers and landowners, go ahead, print out those AFT case studies. Perhaps print out the slides, the PowerPoint slides that you might use as handouts. You might like the one slide approach. You might like the multiple slides approach. Print those out, get those ready for your conversation. And then of course, you're not going to print out all the case studies. You're going to choose the key AFT case studies that best fit to your farmer. And then you're going to choose the best amassing evidence slides that'll best fit to your farmer, and any other resources that AFT has provided. And it's not just this session that you can pull from, because we are restricting our conversation today to the new body of evidence, and that means that you're missing out on a direct live talk on everything we've presented previously, but that's so worth it if you've got row crop farmers and if you've got livestock related row crop farmers, to please go and peruse and find those resources that are best for you. And feel free to direct message us as well to tell us what you're specifically looking in, and we can help you find those things. And finally, we really want to feature more FRPP related soil health successful producers. So help us find them in your neck of the woods. Let us know, and then we can see if they're going to fit our case studies and feature them. Yes, there we go. That was the end of the intro. Before I turn it over to Chelly, I'm going to ask Jamie, if she's listening, to pop into the chat or wherever she wants to share with the audience our evaluation form. Don't be scared. It's just a 4-minute experience. It's just 8 questions. And we truly value and benefit from hearing from you regarding, what you hear from us and how it may or may not be useful or resonating with you. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from you via that anonymous evaluation survey. Thank you so much. And I'll stop sharing my screen now.
All righty. It's my turn to share mine. Okay. Click here to share. There we go. All right, we should be seeing my screen. Do we see my screen?
Yes, but it's the interior screen. And so what I found is before you get it ready to show, and then show your screen.
Okay, so go ahead and pop it up as a
PowerPoint already. Yes, okay. I didn't like it when I tried to correct the situation. It wanted to be perfect from the get-go. Let's see if Ben remembers to do this. Ha ha ha.
Let me see. Let me find my window again. Here we go. Push you over to this window. Share screen. All right. Does that look correct?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. My name is, am I still sharing correctly? Okay. I switched.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. I like to keep people's faces up here so I can look at people as I'm talking. So, hello, my name is Chelly Maples, and I'm excited to be talking with you today about our efforts to kind of search the scientific literature surrounding soil health. And our goal here was to search for relevant studies on soil health and soil health economic outcomes, to synthesize that information into short, sweet, as Michelle said before, easy to read, 2-page documents that include important information to aid in producer decision making. Let's switch slide. There we go. Okay. So we like to call these summary documents farmer's guides. And last year we produced 3 2-page documents to help conservation professionals communicate the literature surrounding soil health practice implementation in row crop systems. And based on the literature, again, we separated it into kind of 3 different guides. Number 1, the findings from budget analyses. The second included findings from research trials. And the third included findings from national surveys. And so to summarize the summaries, just so you all know it's out there, it's available, you can go to our website and grab it. I've included a few key takeaways from each guide here. So first, within row crop systems, soil health practice implementation can provide economic gains, but it is a long-term investment. So yield changes may not occur right away. The literature points to a time frame of about 4 to 6 years before yield starts to reflect soil changes. Another key finding is that soil health practices are often complementary and implemented together. So for example, introducing cover crops and reducing tillage usually go hand in hand. And then finally, location, producer experience, and farm size, they all matter when it comes to seeing a bang for your soil health bucks. But moving on to this year, we are moving into the grazing sphere, and we are working on producing another series of 3 guides focused on grazing soil health practices. So the first guide focuses on what the economic literature says about grazing practices, specifically for cow-calf production systems. And this guide was actually just put on the website this morning, so it's up and ready for you all to download and peruse. It's very exciting. And so we're going to be focusing on this first economic guide for the rest of this presentation, but I did kind of want to let you all know, obviously we have 2 more in the pipeline. The next up is going to talk about the forage and soil health outcomes for grazing management. And the final one is going to kind of combine the economic, forage, and soil health outcomes for seasonal practices like mob or flash grazing. So number 2 and 3 in the works, most likely will be released over the summer. And so here's an example of our first completed grazing guide in the series. And I just want to show you a quick layout to let you know kind of how what's included and what to look for. So first we have an intro box up top that gives a nice general, why somebody may care about changing grazing practices. And then also what this specific guide is based on, highlighted by those nice yellow words in the bottom. We then go into some pertinent, important details with a bit more information from the studies that we did summarize. And then finally, we provide succinct key takeaways from the literature we collected. Before we jump into the interesting findings of the first guide, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with respect to a couple of key terms. So over this spring, my colleagues and I have found that these terms can mean potentially slightly different things depending on what region of the country you're working in. So for clarity, we have adopted Oklahoma State University's definition for stocking rate and stocking density. So when I say stocking rate, this is a metric that includes animal units, pasture size, and grazing period. And that grazing period is a time component. And so in words, this is essentially accounting for the variation in forage use between animals of different sizes and the amount of exposure that those animals have to the forage. Alternatively, stocking density only includes animal units and pasture size. So it does not include grazing period, does not include that time component. So essentially, this is a measure of acres per head. So now that's out of the way, we searched the literature to find the economics of what happens when you change from a conventional system to a more intensive grazing system, something even just like simple rotational grazing, or something a little bit more intensive, such as adaptive multi-paddock or mob, for example. And I've included this schematic here to kind of visually show the difference between the continuous grazing and the simple rotational, and then also kind of what that spectrum can look like, moving or increasing intensity from simple rotational to adaptive multi-paddock, etc. So from the schematic, it's pretty evident that a few things do change when management intensifies. We have things like new infrastructure, largely that's fencing. We have increased labor requirements associated with moving cattle. So there are definitely some changes that occur when you intensify your management. And kind of to put some things into maybe more of a table format, I know we may have different learners. Grazing practices themselves can pretty much be defined as a set of rotation frequencies and stocking rates or densities. And so from continuous grazing, no rotation is happening. You have a set stocking rate and density. For traditional rotational, rotation is happening, but it's relatively set. So maybe every single week you're going to be moving your cattle from pen to pen, from paddock to paddock. The last two here, which are adaptive multi-paddock and mob grazing, these are intensive forms of rotational grazing. And the major change here is that the rotation frequency in both adaptive multi-paddock and mob it varies. So it's going to be based on forage availability and forage quality throughout your season. So it's going to require more continuous producer monitoring for these more intense systems. So then when we think about economics and grazing and changing management, there are two large categories that are going to be most affected by the management change. The first, of course, is going to be cost. We're going to have labor cost changes. We're going to have fencing cost changes. We're going to have infrastructure cost changes. And the second is we're going to see a change in returns. So costs do affect returns, but we could also see revenue changes through cattle performance changes. Because any change in cattle performance, which when I say cattle performance, I mainly mean weight gain, it translates directly into revenues. So for this first guide, we included 10 economic studies, and we have a pretty equal distribution of studies that cover some pasture land and grassland and also rangeland. So starting with the cost changes, 4 studies we reviewed reported cost increases associated with intensive grazing methods relative to continuous or conventional grazing methods. And again, I've listed some of the major cost categories here. The first, fencing. So fencing itself is already a high cost relative to other costs in cow-calf production systems, but fencing costs were approximately 40% higher under intensive grazing practices relative to a conventional grazing practice. The second big category is labor. Labor costs nearly doubled under intensive management based on the studies that we included, and this increase is largely due to moving cattle around more frequently, as well as maintaining any additional infrastructure that may be necessary to intensify that management. And then the third cost category is infrastructure. And infrastructure cost changes are a bit more variable, and so it's a bit more difficult to tie a general number to, because some operations may have various levels of existing infrastructure that can be more easily transitioned into some type of intensive grazing system. There were also cost decreases to note, which is a great thing. The first category being feed and hay. So rotational grazing is associated with higher forage availability and higher forage quality. And so more forage of better quality means less feed and or hay purchases. And then the second is supplements. Again, more nutritionally complete forage means less money needs to be spent purchasing supplements to round out your cattle's nutrition needs. Next, moving on to the net return changes. So 5 studies reported higher net returns under intensive grazing relative to conventional grazing. And this is largely due to the chance to increase your stocking densities, which translates into more pounds of beef per acre. But one thing we did notice with this change in net returns is that the size of the operation may affect the magnitude of that net return change. And this is essentially because larger operations can spread costs across a higher number of cattle and therefore achieve economies of scale that the smaller producers just may not have the opportunity to. And then 4 studies reported that cattle gains under intensive management were greater than or equal to gains under conventional management. And so a question that I've heard some producers have is that, okay, if you're putting more cattle in a smaller area, wouldn't that cause more competition for the forage and therefore adversely affect cattle weight gain? And that's entirely possible due to the increased chance to overstock a paddock, but careful management and careful monitoring of forage availability and quality can help mitigate that risk. And to conclude, we have a few takeaways from this first guide. The first is that there is a potential for long-term increased profitability. So this is largely due to increased forage quality and utilization. Second, larger operations may benefit more than smaller operations. And as I just mentioned, this is largely due to the fact that they can spread their costs out more over more head of cattle, get those economies of scale. And they also may have the chance to implement more paddocks, which can help lead to more rest time in between kind of your grazing your cattle. Third, short-term costs will increase, and that could be a barrier to adoption. So it's good to investigate avenues that could help cost share infrastructure changes or perhaps even fully fund infrastructure changes. And then finally, there appears to be a low impact on cattle gains as long as management is done correctly and the proper stocking density and rotation frequency is achieved. So by carefully monitoring and managing the amount of cattle you're putting in your paddocks and then watching your forage health could kind of protect you against some adverse cattle performance. So I think we have a quick question break. I think I'm a little ahead of schedule, but I didn't want to overload anybody too much. So does anybody have any questions?
That was excellent, Shelley. Thank you.
Thank you. Pick everybody back up. Okay, I can see everybody again. Oh, I see a hand. Kat.
Hi, yeah, I think I might have just missed this part, but you said like 5 studies and then 4 studies. How many studies were there in total?
Yeah, so there were 10 studies in total. And so some studies we found multiple findings out of, so they may fit, into like this explains a higher net return, this explains a lower cost. So they were not mutually exclusive.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Nicholas. Do you have a question? Or did you accidentally raise your hand? You're speaking, we can't hear. All right.
I have an anticipated question that may come now or later, and I think, Shelley, you have a nice solution answer to it. But does the Farmer's Guide apply to rangeland and pasture land, and Western states, or which states? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So the studies that were included, at least in the first guide, are, I think I said this earlier, pretty equally distributed between studies that were done in rangeland scenarios and pastureland scenarios, and then maybe in your like Great Plains grassland transitional areas. So the results I think are pretty applicable. There wasn't enough literature kind of either way on pastureland or rangeland to create a specific guide with specific findings to these specific ecosystems, but yeah.
And is it Farah and Verna? Sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, but they're saying that generally overhead cost is our biggest issue as we assist landowners. Can you tell me more about what overhead cost means to you? Is that like?
Yeah, it's there in Verna with Palmer Land Conservancy. So we're in southeastern Colorado. And as you can imagine, our scale is much bigger because we're in an arid region. So when we're coming to our landowners that we work with and trying to establish soil health practices, particularly rotational grazing, that fencing can become such a task on the front end. And so, I mean, this is a great training, and I'm sure I'll find more ways, but we're always just trying to figure out ways to assist with infrastructure overhead cost, because this region was hit with the Dust Bowl particularly hard. And so many of the farmers have that generational knowledge of the usefulness of even just traditional rotation. I mean, better than that is, like you said, AMP, but yeah, that's generally what we're facing in this region.
Yeah, we have a consultant that works on this team with us, and she is kind of a rangeland consultant. And so she's talked to us a lot about how, fencing is a big barrier, could be a big barrier to adopting these principles, especially on, your larger ranches, which is definitely something that I think we all need to keep into our minds.
But, hopefully there's access to federal and maybe even state financial assistance to help with that fencing cost to achieve a rotational grazing management plan. So hopefully getting with your local conservation specialists will help address those potential requests for assistance. Wow, I'm just going to have to potentially butcher names, but Rhiannon Klingon, what a very cool name. We have also have challenges with labor support and cost for labor, suggestions on how to approach that for ranchers. I feel like that is a state and nationwide challenge, yes?
Yeah, I think one thing to point out for those challenges of costs and labor are some of the studies that Shelley pointed out, point to, acknowledge those cost issues, but still you're seeing the net income increases down the line. And so I think that's kind of having that long-term approach is a good method of, looking at showing the evidence that there are studies, whether they're research studies or, coming up talking to Don of making these increased costs. Nobody's going to deny that they exist, but, seeing ways to counteract them long term.
Yeah, I saw a question also by Nicholas Miller asking if there was work being done on economics of transition from confined systems to systems including grazing. And I think we would love to touch on that as we kind of move forward through our case study methodology development. Right now we've started with approaching it from you're already grazing, you're just not intensively managing that grazing, but we do know that there's an opportunity to analyze the economics of those other types of systems that do include a change from confinement or including that type of management into the switch. So we're very excited to get into that.
I guess I'll add one thing. I guess I should preface, I'm from Wisconsin. We have a lot of dairies and small operations. We're pretty diverse. So I'm not familiar with ranching or the economics of like vast landscapes. But one thing that we see from a lot of the innovators and seasoned conservationists is when you're working with people in that transition period who have a lot of fixed assets in their possession, but they need liquidity to make the transition because fencing is a different kind of investment. What some farmers don't realize is that making that transition may require you to, but presents you with the opportunity to sell some of this stuff that you're weighed down with. There's a lot of guys who up and sell multiple tractors, and like that in and of itself is $500,000 right there because they won't need them. Like they see this future in front of them and they realize I won't need this because of the transition, so I have the resources even outside of government assistance programs to make it happen. It's just having the commitment to like make that happen. And that's tillage equipment, that's planting equipment, that's, I mean, just thinking of the amount of wealth that's sunk into stuff that is going to be diverted out of the system by the transition happening.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that, Landon. Aline Smith also says so. All right, well, we are now 2 minutes behind. You are a chatty group and we love it. Thank you so much. This has been terrific. So let's put a pause on it just now and turn it over to Ben.
Yeah, let me find my PowerPoint. Which one do I want? That one. Okay, am I sharing the right thing?
Yes, you are.
Beautiful.
Awesome. So yeah, I'm going to talk about one of the other kind of products that we have at AFT, which is our case studies. And as Michelle mentioned, we've got 19 on row crop operations. I think 4 or 5 are row crop operations that also have livestock. So I'll point out some of those today, and then we will end with a conversation with Don, who's going to be our first grazing case study later on. So all our case studies kind of follow the same methodology called a partial budget analysis. It's a fancy economics term to basically say we look at farm budgets before practice implementation and after. And after a change, and the change in this case is going to be soil health practices. So just speaking about our row crop ones, because that's what we have published now. You know, we talk to farmers, we interview them with a questionnaire about what's happened before when they were a conventional farmer to now what's happened after once they implemented soil health practices. And we go through a whole bunch of different categories from machinery, fertilizer, pesticide, everything listed on the side there. And if a farmer says actually nothing changed, we move on. If something's changed, we ask some more questions about that. We take all those changes, we apply prices, some national prices like for crops, machinery, and fertilizer, and then some farm specific prices. We run our analysis in our retrospective soil health economic calculator, which is publicly available on our website. Follow that link. And we get this partial budget table that shows us the net income change, which is kind of the key finding from these case studies. But while we're capturing all that economic information, we also want to capture the farmer's story, why they wanted to make those changes, what challenges they had to overcome, and what they see as the big successes and how they overcame those challenges. Every farm has a unique story, and that adds so much perspective to this economic data. So all our 19 now and counting case studies feature a similar format so that they're really easy to talk to and pick up. If you kind of understand one, you'll understand how to read and take the information from all of them. They start with this farm at a glance that gives you the quick hitting points so you can see if you're actually would be interested in this case study. All have an introduction that tells that farm story, an economic section, and a conclusion. And then very importantly, this is the back of the case study, the PBA table, the partial budget analysis table. So to zoom in just on that a little bit further, it's not that complicated when you look at it. All those are budget items, and on the left are the positive ones. So you have increased income. You know, that's an easy one. Anything yield increases and such, or decreased cost. We tally that up, and those are going in your green, your plus column. And then on the right are those costs, those decrease in income or increase in costs. We tally that up in the red, and we try really hard to make sure we're accurately capturing those. We want to tell the actual story, not some overly rosy picture. At the very bottom, you'll see what this means, the bottom line. You have your annual change in net income, per acre change in net income, and your return on investment. As Michelle said earlier, we're looking for FRPP case studies because we want to tell the unique story of what happens when permanently protected land is also permanently protected land, and the farmers there are thinking about soil health practices. So we have our first case study on FRPP protected land here with B&R Farms in Pennsylvania. And when I was interviewing them, one thing that really stood out was talking to this is a family farm, and they're in that transition from the parents retiring, passing it on to the kids, and Kevin and Morgan, who are coming onto the farm now, asked them about what it means to farm on a protected farm. And they said, you know, they're really glad that their dad protected the farm, but really, what's the point of protecting a farm if you don't protect the soil? Because you're not going to be able to grow anything. So that really kind of hit home to me of why protected land and soil health kind of run hand in hand. So this is our little quick plug. If you have any FRPP farmers that would be interested in participating, we're now offering kind of grazing as well as our row crop case studies. You can follow the QR codes, and you can contact myself or Charlie or Michelle, Beth or Jamie. Anybody will point you into the right people. Right now, we're looking just for beef producers, but coming this summer, we're hoping to add dairy producers and really just looking for people that are traditional grazers that have made the change to rotational grazing. So I'm going to talk about that first case study. And again, we have a lot of case studies, a lot of slides out there. They all kind of read the same. So if you kind of are comfortable with one, you'll be comfortable with all of them. But this first one is Peekaboo Livestock Ranch in Peekaboo, Idaho. It's an awesome family farm story. And they have been doing some really interesting soil health practices. This one here is grazing cover crops. There's the photo you see, and it's a multi-species cover crop mix. They're going to go into barley next. So I'm going to run through, I think, 6 slides on this farm. They kind of go into the details and then a highlight slide. These slides are all available for not only this farm, but for our 3 New York dairy case study farms, for all of our row crop farms. So if you want slides to maybe present at an event or something, but this isn't the right case study for you, come talk to us about our other case studies, and we'll help you out. So just a little background, AFT, we interviewed Nicholas Purdy there on the left, his uncle Pat Purdy, and the patriarch of the family, Nick Purdy, about their 135-year-old ranch in Blaine County, Idaho. It's about 4,800 acres, but in the study area, we only picked out 1,800 acres, and that's where they grow barley and alfalfa. On the other acres, they grow mustard and potatoes. So what we're really here to talk about, the soil health practices. In 2014, Pat started experimenting with no-till and compost, and has since then implemented no-till across all acres. They apply dairy manure compost to their alfalfa, replacing their synthetic fertilizer. And then in 2015-16, they started experimenting with cover crops. And then, fast forwarded. So just to give a little sneak peek of the final results, their annual total net income change is about $117,000 per year, which is about $65 per acre, or 136% change in ROI. We like to include some of these motivations, why the family started getting involved in this. So Pat was the one who introduced these ideas of implementing soil health practices. He learned about no-till at a Pacific Northwest Direct Seed Company Association conference and through local farmers. He also credits his dad, Nick, with teaching him that sense of duty, the steward of the land. And when we talk to case study farmers across the country, that one really kind of resonates across it. And he said he started seeing the soil as a living biological system, and that's when his perspective changed. But financially, they also saw it as a cash saving from reducing inputs with having healthier soil. So they had some resource concerns. They had some erosion, particularly wind erosion where they're at in Idaho, some insect pressure and soil compaction that they were hoping they could also solve. So here comes the good stuff for us economists. This is the numbers, the table. So now we have this detailed results of our PBA analysis. You've got increases in income from grazing the cover crop. They said they got about 1/3 of a ton per acre of forage, which is about 75 acres from their multi-species cover crop mix. They also saw increases to their barley and alfalfa from the soil health practices, and that's what they directly attribute to the soil health practices. They've seen other increases that they attribute to other things. They've also seen decreased machinery costs from switching to no-till, and they're no longer sorry, I forgot to click with my animations. No longer applying insecticide. So in total, you're seeing the big number at the bottom is $200,000. But as always, it's not all rosy. There were costs to come. No decreases in income, which is important, but cover crops cost money. The cover crops here, it was a more expensive multi-species mix, and so that costs a little bit more. They also have started doing soil testing, which is an added cost, and then that increase into manure is costing about $42 extra. And then we also include a machinery cost here from switching to the application. And then finally, a learning cost. They spend about 50 hours a year learning about these practices, and it's something we'd like to include because it is a transition, and it takes a while to learn about these practices and change it how they're doing things. So in total, though, the benefits of about $113 per acre outweigh those costs of $48 per acre, leading to a $65 per acre net income change. That ROI means basically for every dollar they put in, they got $1.36 back. So pretty high. And then finally, they had some barriers to adoption. That upfront capital required to get the no-till air seeder, like that was a big issue. Also some technical barriers, cover crops. It takes a while to fine tune your strategy. And finally, just that mental hurdle of everything that we have been doing for so long, we need to change and adjust to. And that, I give all these farmers so much credit for adjusting and changing that mindset. So quickly, that was the 6-slide longer story, but if you don't have a ton of time, here's just your one slide to easily go through things. And then, yeah, so now excitingly, we're going to move on to our conversation with Don Jackson from Pompeii Rest Farm, who is going to be our first grazing case study. So just to introduce Don a little bit, I started grazing about rotational grazing about 10 years ago and has had a great success for it. So Don, his farm is in Lawrence County, South Carolina, which is has about 55 acres. He proudly as grass-fed regeneratively raised cattle and goats, about 28 cow-calf pairs. Traditional grazing was degrading the soil and also degrading his wallet. So a great quote from Don was, "I just don't want to be sustainable. I want to improve." And that same philosophy of leaving the land better than he found it, being a true steward of the land. And so more than just words, Don sent us the proof. You can see in 2015, this is the same pasture. And on the left here, you can tell from the traditional grazing, you've got the weeds there, you've got dirt spots. And then on the right, you've got beautiful green grasses, happy cows. So you can see really the benefits there. So we're now going to talk to Don, but if everybody could turn off their cameras so that hopefully we just have myself and Don up, and then we can get to the questions. Let me just turn off my sharing screen. Oh no. Oh, there we go. There we go. Sorry about that. So Don, you're off mic. How's it going, Don? Thank you for joining us.
I'm doing great. Hope you are.
So Don, the first question for everyone is, what were your motivations to change from traditional grazing? Were there any economic drivers, and did you run into any challenges when transitioning?
Yes, I didn't. My son talked to me, and it was said I was going broke conventionally doing the practices I were doing. I fought him 18 months, and I said, this is my train. I'll run it like I want to. I was doing conventional. He said there's better ways to do this. So we had some pretty tough discussions, but he just asked me, said, "Dad, just try rotational grazing." And I did, and I started rotating using reels and poly braided wire, and I saw a major difference in 6 months. And once I saw the difference, I started doing a lot of research and reading and understanding more about the regenerative side of agriculture, and the light bulb came on, and I hadn't looked back. You had a couple of parts of questions, but
Yeah.
but go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, so I mean that's the motivation, and I think you've mentioned the economic driver. So can you just talk a little bit about that transition and any challenges that you found, on the land or mindset, or any hurdles that you came up across, and how you had to overcome them?
Well, I think it is a mindset. You have to have a mindset. You want to make it's an attitude and mindset. You have to do it. You have to want to. You don't see the results right off the bat. It took me, what you saw in that picture was 5 years coming. Now, one of the biggest hurdles that I have in this state is lack of training through the land grant universities. To be kind and nice, they teach and preach a lot of conventional practices, plow and spray. So that was a big frustration for me that when you deal with your land grant universities, well, my land grant university, I'm speaking of mine in this state, but I couldn't get any help. I'd ask them what to do about the thistles, and they'd say spray. What do you do about the dogfill? Spray. I need to get some better forage, plow and do a seed bed. And I didn't want to go that direction because I learned a little bit more. And the guys in Idaho, I had to spend a lot of money also to go to conferences, go to the experts, spend a lot out of pocket for travel expenses, but share with the experts and share with other farmers. And the financial input to me was, I had no problem financially because a lot of people here in this state doesn't put a cross fencing, but I have a good NRCS office. I was fortunate to get a lot of funding for water lines, troughs, high traffic area, and my cross fencing. So I utilized what was available. You don't see a lot of that applied for here because a lot of people, they just don't want to do cross fencing, so financially, I got some help there. Now, once the cross fencing was started and we had the cross fencing, it cut my labor. But the biggest challenge that I see is, where do you go for assistance? Number two, it's labor. That's been mentioned. It's very labor intensive doing it. Although I'm not a rangeland, I'm pasture, and I only have 155 acres. And I'm not on flat ground. I'm in the Piedmont, and I'm up and down hills and valleys. So it's hard to put the reels up. You got to put the post up at the high spots, low spots, and it's very labor intensive. But I have no problem dropping a wire once or twice a day because I see the benefit of what's going on with my forages and the health of my. Now the I've seen, far outweigh. I have not put any fertilizer, commercial fertilizer, or on in 12 years. No pesticides, herbicides in 12 years, and I have not had any supplements on my cows. It's all forage, space, or hay. So those costs are very tangible that it cut. Another cost I've seen that's dropped down on my records is my vet bills. I don't have the vet bills I used to have. And I look at it like this. You got healthy soil, you got healthy plants, forage, you got healthy livestock. So it kind of works, it's a holistic type management on this regenerative. It all works together, and it's a holistic type thing. And I don't look at it as a challenge. I mean, some of these challenges I have are the labor, I see the results. I've seen my organic matter go from 1.5% to 5% on my soil. They say you can't do it. Yes, you can. So my organic matter has really increased. You could go the top 2 or 3 inches. Where I am in my pasture land now was all cotton. Cotton was king years ago down the deep south, and we just have degraded soil. Everything is degraded, and it was used up. And when cotton went, they said, what we're going to do, we're going to just put some fences up and put cows on. So nothing has been done to improve the soil. I'm more concerned with what's below the ground than what's above the ground. I found out through the conventional practices and through the, you worry about more bushels per acre and more pounds per steer than you do worry about the soil. That all the training from the land grant schools go towards more bushels per acre and more pounds per steer. And I'm more worried about cutting my inputs because that's the only thing I can control. I cannot control the cow beef market. I can't do anything about the price of per pound, but I can cut my inputs, which has been, I've cut my hay cost in half, no supplements whatsoever, and no fertilizers or any kind of sides.
That's awesome. And I think Don kind of went into our second question there of kind of since transitioning, what have you seen economically? You just described it. So can you describe your soil a little bit? I mean, you showed us that great picture, but tell us about the pastures since you've transitioned and how that soil and the plants look.
Well, you saw that I had no cover. So now I have very few bare spots. You've got to keep your ground covered. I worked hard to keep my ground covered. We do a big diversity of perennial forages. You're limited on by zones, but I incorporate them. I'm predominantly fescue. I'm in the fescue belt, so I incorporate legumes. I incorporate forbs. To be specific, I do a lot of red and white clover. I do plantain. I incorporate chicory. I incorporate vetch, and also I have to incorporate some Bermuda, which is a warm season grass, because as a grass-fed beef producer, I cannot have a monoculture because I have to keep these cows on my fields and pastures rotating all year long, so they'll have forage, and I don't have to feed. I've seen a big impact on the forage, on the compaction of the soil. My water filtration rates have gone when I have rain, it goes into my soil. During drought times down here, I have seen I can go 2 to 3 months longer than my neighbors before I have to feed hay, just because what moisture I do get is going into the soil. And I had a situation with a pond, and we have what we call wet weather ponds. Everything, you build your ponds at the low area because it's all water runoff. There's no streams, so it's called wet weather ponds. I actually, into my 4th year, I thought my pond had a leak in it, and I had it checked for a leak at the dam. No leaks. Then the light bulb came off with me, and I said, oh no, what's happening is I'm not having any runoff in my pastures. It's not going to the ponds. It's going into my soil. So that's really when I realized this was all just not taught. If you do the practices, it does work. I've seen a big increase of honeybees. I've seen ladybugs. I've seen when you go out that little picture you had, that was a picture of my field with the clovers and stuff and the ladybugs. But I've seen a wildlife population. We have just a big flock of wild turkey that came after I started. Yes, so it's a holistic thing. It works all around. If you go back to nature, and I found out doing regenerative, it's a lot easier to work with nature than against nature. Mother Nature's going to win every time. So once my son told me to quit trying to beat Mother Nature, and I accepted that, and I went and said, "Listen, I'll work with you." I said, "Mother Nature, I'll work with you." So I've seen just changes in our wildlife, our deer population, our wild turkey, the insects, good insects. I'm not doing, and we do a few little pollinator plots, but hey, they enjoy that too.
That's awesome. So everybody, I've got one last question for Don, and then I'm seeing some already in the chat, so keep them coming there, and I'll ask Don. But the last one I have is, so Don, we talked before, the audience today, it's a lot of people that work for land trusts or land protection entities, and they're thinking about approaching farmers or grazers during their yearly kind of check-ins. If we go back in time 10 years or so when you were traditionally grazing and what you know now, any advice on how you would approach somebody who's a traditional grazer but might be open to hearing about regenerative practices, about rotational grazing?
I think the only way you can do it, because family farms, when you have family farms and you've been farming all your life, and I've been around, I was on National Grazing Land Board for a few years, and the grazing lands and the weir pasture lands, and it's all different. But if you've been in a farming with a family farm and it's been transitioning for years from generations, it is hard once you've done these practices, and this is the way my granddaddy did it, and this is the way my daddy did it. It's hard to change, and I had that mindset. I said, "This is the way we do it," And now there's a lot of videos, podcasts, webinars, and a lot of consultants right now. But you have to take all this as a kind of a grain of salt, because you got to funnel it all into a sieve, because all of this training and everything we're talking about today has to be adapted to your environment. You have to be one size doesn't fit all. But I would say to do it is we have to have, like we do demonstration plots on forages. Mm-hmm. I think you're going to have to do some demonstration plots with farms and bring people in and show and tell. Because you can talk it a haul, you can really talk it, but making the jump. Because if you don't have the mindset, it's going to be labor intensive, and it's going to cost you, as the lady said today, infrastructure, water lines, cross fencing, high traffic areas. It's the capital, the investment is going to be expensive and labor intensive. But if we'll ever get this going, that like what I'm doing, what you saw that picture, if you can ever get them on your site on a show and tell, and I don't know how that's going to happen unless the USDA or NRCS would actually do some, instead of talking about it and put one, let's find a place somewhere where you put it in practice and bring them and show and tell.
Yeah, that's good advice. And maybe for, the land trust out here, if you do know a farmer or a producer that is rotating their cattle, approach them about hosting a field day or something there. Don, we got one question and go.
Well, and I know that it's hard with a land trust or, farmland trust or whoever to go out and convince them, because a lot of farmers, these old hardtails, look at you and say, well, how many cows do you have? You telling me, how to do this, but how many do you have? So, if we could, do the podcast or show up like we do here and actually show a live video of what's going on, I think it makes a difference. But it has to be, I can't talk to anybody in Idaho or Utah about South Carolina. It has to be local environment that we can talk on the same language and same forage.
Yeah, and that's what we've shown with our case studies is that so many times we present them and people say, oh, this is great, but it's not close enough to where I'm from. And that local evidence is really, really what matters. Don, I wanted to ask you a question from the chat here from Lisa, and she said, outside of your son, where did you, if you had any recommendations of anybody other than your son that you would look for advice, whose advice have you considered? So where do you go to get information?
Oh yeah, I can. When I started, I personally, they used. I went to the Grazing Land Coalition, a Grazing Land Conference. Started going there, and went to the Appalachian Grazing Conference in West Virginia. But I got to, I found out about the Stockman Grass Farmer with Allen Nation. That is a great publication. That's the only publication I take. And also we had, but I did bring Alan Williams in to me. Alan Williams came on my place years ago, and he told me what I should do and what I should not do. So Alan helped, and then, but the conferences and going to the right conferences and speaking to people that has the same mindset. I had more failures than I had successes. I can share those all day long, but now I can see the, smart people do stupid things, but stupid people keep doing the same thing over. So, and I changed. But Alan Williams is a good resource. You got Greg Judy. I know Greg, but he hadn't been on the place, but Alan Williams has. And I do, and as far as the soil health goes, they're doing a lot of work with soil health, regenerative ag and stuff like that. So you're very limited where you can go or who you can call. I cannot afford these consultants now. I cannot afford their fees. So it's tough. But we have really, what we've done here in South Carolina, if I have a minute, I don't mind telling this.
Please.
We have created a nonprofit, South Carolina Regenerative Livestock Producers Network, that we have chartered with the state of South Carolina because we couldn't get the information we needed. So we banded together and asked what, I think it was Lisa. We had 15 producers in South Carolina that was in the regenerative. But we had our first little workshop the other day, and we just had it on Facebook. We had 89 people show up, and we didn't have the university involved with it. And that showed us that, hey, people do want to do it, and they are reaching out where I can get information.
Yeah, you were telling us about how successful that first meeting was, and yeah, that's something that Chelly and I have noticed as we dive into the grazing world is that there's not the depth of evidence, speaking just on the economic side, as there is with the row crop world, and that's something that it's huge to get producers that information that they need to not only how do you implement the practices, but what's going to happen. Is it going to be worth my time?
Well, I can't do it. It's been put into the corn, soybean, wheat, oats, the big ones. There's not a lot of research dollars been put into forages nationwide. It's going to the big, it's the money crops.
Yeah. Any other questions in the chat for Don? I think I see Tessa, one question for me, and just to clarify that, I think maybe I didn't speak so clearly, but Tessa, all the farmers saw some things change. It's just not in every category. So some didn't see a change in fertilizer, or some didn't see a change in machinery costs, but they all saw some change. So sorry for that misunderstanding. Any more questions for Don, or anybody want to raise their hand? I think we might have time for one more. Landon, if you want to jump on.
Yeah, Landon, you Colorado. Okay.
Wisconsin, but yeah.
Wisconsin. Okay, that's Wisconsin. Okay, I'm sorry.
I had a quick question. Is your son involved? Is he intending on being involved in the future of your farming operation? And in your community, in your community as one of the farmers of, I'm sure, many in your area, do you see that to be a real deciding factor in the decision to make investments beyond just the capital, but like the use of this for generations and decades to come? That's one thing I've noticed over the years, is that's a real sticking point, is whether there's someone coming behind them in the operation or if there's not.
Landon, that's a great question. And yes, to answer your question, we have already, got everything worked out to transfer to the children and the grandkids. Yes, my son will be retiring this May, I think, or next May, I can't remember. But he is going to be managing and taking over the farm. Now, to a certain extent, as long as I'm living, I'm hoping I can have some input. But he's coming, but he's the one who changed me. So yeah, he's taking over. And my other children stayed here after they went to college. Then they came back, and they know what we're doing and why we do it. What we're seeing here now, me and my wife talked this morning at breakfast about the grandboys. It's a hard thing, Landon. They see what I'm doing, but they don't understand why I'm doing it. And I go by and they ask me questions and said, Papa, you have more grass than here, and I'm trying to explain it to them. So they're seeing it, but I had to sit there and talk to my grandsons why I'm trying to be a good steward and regenerative. I want to give back and take. That's the biggest problem we see, that people, I want to be a giver than a taker and leave it better than I found it. And I think that's what the good Lord intended for you to do. But yes, my children understand why we're doing it. It's just working through these grandsons to understand, don't drink the Kool-Aid from the conventional side. Stay on the regenerative side.
Well done. Thank you so much. Chris, I think that's our time, right? So I just want to say, Don, thank you so much. This has been great. And you're such a great spokesperson for these practices, because you not only speak highly of them, you live them as well.
Well, thank you for, doing that. And if I can help any way, I certainly will. And I'd love to have people visit at any time.